Let's take a look at using server-side includes. In the Chapter 7, 07_02 folder of the exercise files is a subfolder called includes, and it contains two files, copyright.php and para.html. This is copyright.php. It contains the definition of a custom function called linCopyright, and because this is PHP code, the file must begin with a PHP opening tag. Para.html contains an HTML paragraph that contains a link to another file. It's going to be included in another page, so it's just a snippet of HTML. It doesn't have a doc type, head or body. There's nothing wrong with putting the doc type or head in an external file, but when everything has been merged together, the resulting web page should have only one doc type, HTML element, head and body. I'm going to include these files in this file here, parent.php, which is in the main 07_02 folder. Let's just open that. At the moment it contains only HTML. What I'm going to do is to include that paragraph, para.html, after the first paragraph in the HTML here. So insert a new line and then a PHP block. And inside that PHP block, we need to have the include command. So include. Now many developers use parentheses after include as though it's a function, but it's not a function. It's actually what's called a PHP language construct, and using parentheses is entirely optional. Anything that's optional means extra typing, so I'm going to leave it out. We need a string, and that needs to contain the path to the file that we want to include. Because of the way that PHP looks for external files, it's best to use a document relative path, beginning with // to indicate that the path begins in the current folder. You can also use an absolute path. What you can't use is a path that's relative to the site root. In other words, a path that begins with a /. If you try to do that, it just won't work. So we're going down into the includes folder, and then what we're looking for is para.html. And I'm going to duplicate that line and then move it down below the next paragraph. So we're including the same paragraph twice. So if we save that and then load the page into a browser, here's the result. The HTML that's in the external file has got a different class. That's why we've got this different color background. But if we right-click and view the page source, apart from the text here, there's absolutely no indication that the content comes from a different file. Everything has been merged together on the server. So let's see what happens if the file can't be found. I'm going to close View Source and then go back to the editing program. And instead of para.html, I'm going to change this to para.htm. PHP won't be able to find that because it doesn't exist. If we go back to the browser, there is the ordinary HTML, and then we get this warning, includes para.htm, failed to open stream, no such file or directory. Then we've got another warning, but because we used include, the PHP script continues. So we then get the next HTML paragraph, and then we get the second external file. That's got the correct path, so it's included correctly. But let's see what happens if instead of using include, we use require. So go back to the editing program and change include here to require. Save that and refresh the page in the browser. We get the original HTML, then we get a warning, require, includes para.htm, failed to open stream, no such file or directory. Then we get a fatal error, and then nothing else. Because we used require, once a file can't be found, the script is abandoned. So let's include the function definition now and then use the function. So go back to the editing program. Let's just correct that so we don't end up with nothing. And then on line 14, I'm going to add a separate PHP block to include the function definition. I'm doing that for a particular reason which will become obvious in a moment. So require, and then the path to includes and then copyright.php. And after that PHP block, which has included the function definition, we can now use the function. So we'll have an HTML paragraph. Then immediately inside there, we'll use the PHP shorthand for echo. And we can then call the function linCopyright. And I'm recording this in 2015, so that will be the start year that we pass to it. And then outside of the PHP block, my name. So if we save that and reload the page into the browser, we're getting both of those external files in, and then we've included the definition of linCopyright, and it's echoed the copyright notice with 2015 as the year. So that has worked well. But if we go back to the editing program, and the reason that I put this in a separate PHP block is I want to show you what happens if you have the function called before you include the function definition from an external file. So I've moved the function call one line above where I'm including the function definition. So if we save that and go back to the browser, this time fatal error, call to undefined function linCopyright. The function is undefined because it's in an external file, and it's only when a function is used in the same file as it's defined that you can call the function before the actual definition. If the function definition is in an external file, that external file must be included first before you can call the function. So let's go back to the editing program. One more thing that I want to look at, and that is using include once. But to prevent that problem with the undefined function, let's just move that back down there to the correct position. And then instead of require for para.html, I'll use include once. And if there's a possibility that the file might be included a second time, you must use include once each time that the file is referenced. So we need to make this include once also down here. So if we now save that and reload the page into the browser, this time that external file is displayed only once. Even though it's listed down here in the PHP, it's not in the HTML. One final thing, this paragraph contains a link to another page. Let's click that. Not found. The requested URL was not found on this server. The problem is that the link in the include file is relative to the includes folder. But once the file has been included in the parent file, it becomes part of the parent file, so the link no longer points to the correct location. This is an important issue that we'll explore in the next video.